Welcome to the debate. So, usually when we talk about exploring a dungeon or an ancient ruin, there is this fundamental assumption of dead space.
Right. The environment is just a backdrop.
Exactly. You walk into a forgotten temple and the stone is just stone. The traps are just physical mechanics, tripwires, crumbling ceilings. But then you step into the world of the Broken Tavern, and suddenly that foundational assumption completely collapses.
Because you realize the walls are actually watching you.
Yeah, the floor beneath your boots is literally breathing. And the most terrifying question for anyone studying the Codex isn't what is hiding in the dark, it is whether the dark itself is hungry.
Which is a very paranoid way to look at it, but go on.
Well, today we are peeling back the heavily redacted layers of cosmic propaganda to try and answer a really unsettling question. What is the true cosmic function of the Broken Tavern? Because I will be arguing that the tavern is a living, sentient apex predator that biologically consumes and weaponizes the intruders who dare to walk its halls.
And I will argue that the tavern is an indifferent, highly advanced metaphysical machine. It was engineered by the deities BAAL and the Keeper to harvest souls and essentially stabilize reality.
Okay, but to truly understand the horror of this structure, we have to look at the exact language used by the earliest surviving scholars. I mean, the Codex itself practically screams the predator theory at us.
I think you're misreading the metaphors, but let's hear it.
The foundational text explicitly describes the tavern not as a building, but as a living, breathing anomaly that spans infinite dimensions. The most crucial phrase in those early chapters is literally 2 words. It is starving.
Which could mean an energy deficit.
But it doesn't just happen to contain monsters, it is an apex predator in architectural form. And we can see this clearly in how it interacts with the people inside it. The tavern acts as a reactionary organism. It actively reads the intent, the emotional state, and the psychological fracture points within the mind of every single intruder.
Right, the localized shifts.
Exactly. It physically rearranges its corridors into a personalized crucible based entirely on their karma alignment. It acts like a tuning fork, vibrating at the exact frequency of an adventurer's deepest psychological trauma.
Okay, but
a machine doesn't manifest your specific childhood fears just to watch you squirm.
See, you are looking at a multidimensional construct and applying biological motives to it, which is honestly exactly the kind of paranoid anthropomorphism that mortal minds use to cope with things they fundamentally cannot understand.
Anthropomorphism? It's literally crushing people.
Yes, but the tavern is not a hungry animal. It is an artificial construct. Think of it as the cosmic pin anchoring an endless chaotic nexus of universes and timelines. Without that pin, we get catastrophic dimensional convergences and, well, total reality failure.
So you're saying it's just a structural support beam?
It's an engine. You have to factor in the original architects here, the deities. You have BAAL, the god of war, who fuels the chaos to constantly test the limits of existence. And you have the Keeper, a neutral god of cosmic order who maintains the structural integrity of the multiverse. Together, they form a fractured equilibrium.
Okay.
And the tavern is the engine of that equilibrium. The shifting architecture you call a personalized crucible, it is simply a highly advanced evaluation algorithm.
An algorithm that tortures people?
Think about the sheer ambient energy shed by a human soul in a state of absolute terror or triumph. Emotional spikes agitate the soul's ether. It creates metaphysical friction. The tavern's stone is essentially a conductive coil.
Wow.
The shifting walls and the psychological torment aren't sadism. They are just the system artificially inducing that friction to generate raw mana. The structure then absorbs that energy to keep the multiversal server from crashing.
But if it's a machine, what about the grinding? Novices think this is just a mechanical trap resetting, like gears in a clock. But the Codex identifies the grinding as the tavern's physical immune response. Whole rooms slide off into dimensional voids, foundations drop away, massive mechanisms crush anything caught within. That is a digestive tract flexing. It is literally trying to process foreign bodies through muscular architectural contraction.
Again, you're projecting biology onto it. If you want hard proof of its mechanical nature, look at the perspective of the invading entity known as the Void Caller.
The void caller is barely comprehensible.
But it's an outsider. It is an entity completely unburdened by mortal terror or human projection. When the void caller enters the tavern, it doesn't see a biological predator. It explicitly states in the text, quote, "To me, it is a battery."
It still has to fight the antibodies, though.
But we actually see the void caller physically siphon a manicore out of a tavern sentinel. A biological organism doesn't have a modular removable battery pack inside its antibodies.
Okay, well, if the tavern is just a clean and different machine recycling energy to keep the lights on in the multiverse, why does it literally fuse flesh with architecture?
What do you mean?
Let's talk about the lowest form of defenders found on the early floors, the thralls. The text describes them as glitched amalgamations of trapped souls, broken armor, and shifting Gothic architecture fused directly into the living foundation.
Which is just a resource reallocation.
No, we're talking about the remnants of failed adventurers who have been physically absorbed into the structure after death. The stone literally softens, acts as a metaphysical enzyme, breaks down their corporeal form, and binds their soul to the masonry. That is biological scavenging.
I disagree entirely.
And it gets infinitely worse when we look at the higher-tier punishment systems. Consider the replacement form. When a high-level party like the Void Syndicate is deemed an existential threat, the abyss beneath the masonry opens, and the tavern compiles a colossal entity stitched together from dozens of failed adventurers.
Right, the amalgamation.
You have a mage's skull violently fused onto a shield bearer's chest, entire torsos stitched into walking contradictions, screaming in agony. This is the behavior of a biological scavenger violently digesting its prey and regurgitating the bones to protect itself. It is chaotic, it is messy, and it is fundamentally organic.
See, you're looking at a messy output and completely misreading the process behind it. The Codex does not call that regurgitation. It uses explicit administrative terminology to describe these events.
Administrative? It's a tower of screaming corpses.
The replacement form you just brought up, the text labels it archived failure. It describes those fused bodies as compiled instances, partially rewritten into the roles they held in prior runs. It's not a scavenger piecing together a meal. It is corrupted memory architecture.
So it's just a buggy computer program?
The system is repurposing local assets to enforce order, because that is efficient resource management. When a program needs to generate a firewall quickly, it compiles whatever localized code is available.
I mean, that sounds very clean in theory.
And if we look at the true enforcers of the tavern, the sentinels, your biological theory completely falls apart. The hourglass sentinel manipulates localized gravitational flow, literally inverting physical law to crush intruders.
Sure, but
And the obsidian sentinel is an unstoppable siege construct completely resistant to pyromantic destruction. These are not biological offspring spawned from a mother beast. The text calls them adaptive executioners specifically engineered. They possess devastating wipe mechanics. Notice the language: not fangs, not claws, not venom, wiping protocols.
okay, but if it is purely code executing a command to clear a sector, why the horrific theatricality?
Theatricality? Yes. Why would a highly advanced machine need to deploy something called the Karma Excision Engine? When the tavern decided the Void Syndicate had existed too long without failing, it didn't just quietly delete them from the server. It didn't execute a clean wipe.
It initiated a targeted response.
It deployed an altar skull, a massive punishment system literally wrapped in execution chains, to force a physical and emotional reaction. The tavern feeds on the moral weight, the karma of the intruders. It doesn't just want them gone, it wants the suffering. It demands the spectacle of their failure.
No, it wants the data.
The Karma Excision Engine is exactly what it sounds like, an engine. It audits their capacity for violence. It is forcing them to resolve their internal, karmic contradictions before the system allows them to proceed to a new instance.
By torturing them?
It's an administrative checkpoint. A brutal one, certainly, but an entirely logical mechanism for a system designed to categorize and extract highly volatile soul energy.
Wait, I've always struggled with this part of the mechanical theory. If this is a perfectly coded machine auditing violence and managing resources, that completely fails to explain the raw physical chaos we see documented on the lower floors.
How so?
If it's a fixed, stable anchor point like you say, how do you explain dimensional bleeding?
We have records of an adventurer walking down a stone corridor, and mid-stride, their heavy iron armor is forcibly reconfigured into futuristic synthetic plating.
Yes, the intersection of layers.
Magical structures spontaneously rewrite themselves to match the dominant reality of whatever space they are bleeding into. How does the physics of a room fundamentally change without instantly killing the adventurer via decompression or gravity inversion?
Well,
To me, this proves the tavern is biologically unstable. It is violently reacting to the infinite realities it intersects with. It behaves exactly like a host body desperately trying to reject 1,000 different organ transplants simultaneously.
That is a very visceral image, I'll give you that, but you are ignoring the underlying physics outlined in the text. Dimensional bleeding is essentially a systemic server glitch.
A glitch that changes iron to synthetic plating?
The Codex states that this is not a failure of observation, but a documented structural instability, because the tavern functions as a fixed anchoring point for infinite overlapping realities. You have conflicting aesthetic frameworks and fundamentally different physical laws intruding upon one another.
Right, so it's unstable.
As an adventurer ascends, the cumulative dimensional pressure forces a spontaneous realignment of matter. The system has to force the adventurer's atomic structure to comply with the governing physics of the current layer, otherwise they would die of decompression.
Exactly, but
It's not a biological fever dream, and it's certainly not an organ rejection. It is overlapping software systems failing to merge harmoniously and violently asserting dominance over localized space. And if we're talking about the system's architecture, we really have to talk about the golden rifts, the personal dimensions.
oh, you mean the supposed safe havens?
Exactly. If the tavern is an apex predator whose sole biological imperative is to consume, digest, and weaponize, why in the world would it offer a stable sanctuary entirely outside of its reach?
Well,
Deep within the infinite floors, adventurers can find dimensional keys that open these golden rifts. These pocket realities exist completely outside the tavern's grinding architecture. Exhausted adventurers can actually construct safe havens, recover their strength, and cultivate resources without fear of sudden annihilation.
yeah, I know about the rifts.
A starving predator does not build an impenetrable steel cage to protect its prey while they sleep, it just eats them. But a machine, a battery, think of it like overclocking a massive supercomputer. If you push the processor, the adventurers, too hard, for too long, without a thermal exhaust port, the hardware melts down.
Thermal exhaust?
The soul shatters before the energy can be fully extracted. The golden rifts are just the tavern's thermal exhaust. They're partitioned drives where the system allows the energy source to stabilize and cool down before re-entering the extraction loop. It's not mercy, it's thermodynamics.
I will concede that the existence of the golden rifts is one of the most baffling anomalies in the Codex, but you are completely ignoring what actually happens inside those rifts, depending on who opens them.
The environment adapts, yes.
The text clearly states that no personal dimension is a neutral void. It is a direct, physical manifestation of the user's soul and karma alignment. Sure, if a true neutral cartographer opens a rift, they might get a serene, starry, cosmic observatory.
Right.
But what happens when a dark karma usurper uses the dimensional key? The Codex says the rift immediately twists into a corrupted, siphoning construct, an oppressive crimson ecosystem, powered by harvested agony and consumed conflict.
Which reflects their soul.
But it means the predatory nature of the tavern actively infects even these safe zones. It uses the adventurer's own corrupted soul to build a mini predator, a localized parasite that feeds on ambient agony. It doesn't look like a cooling zone. It looks like a different flavor of digestion.
Or it is just a neutral reflection of the data inputted into it. If you plug malicious code into a blank, unpartitioned drive, you get a malicious environment.
I don't know about that.
The tavern isn't infecting the space with predatory intent. The Dark Karma user is infecting the space with their own soul's blueprint. The system itself remains completely indifferent to the aesthetic of the environment so long as the thermal exhaust function continues to operate.
Indifferent? Let's talk about Rule 10 then, the law of temporal weight, or as the survivors call it, the permanent scar.
To me, this is the ultimate undeniable proof of the tavern's predatory nature.
Okay, lay it out.
The tavern never lets prey go intact. It demands a permanent price in flesh, blood, or sanity. Look at the pyromantic warlord Dravog. He achieved an absolute evil karma alignment. To survive his personalized crucible, he had to melt his massive great axe directly into his own forearms.
A terrible price, yes.
His hands are permanently fused to the weapon with molten slag. Or look at Valerius, who walks around with a flayed skull, his exposed skeletal structure scorched by abyssal energy. Look at the temporal calcification that ages a young adventurer's limb decades in a single moment, leaving it permanently withered.
Rule 10 is absolute.
The tavern doesn't just kill, and it doesn't just passively harvest energy. It maims. It extracts a toll that can never be healed, no matter what level of restoration magic you use. And here is the real insight. It's not just taking flesh. It is permanently altering the physical silhouette of the adventurer so that they literally fit into the architecture of the lower floors.
You think it's shaping them?
It is pre-molding the clay. It is preparing them to become the next generation of sentinels. It is slowly eating their humanity until only the weapon remains.
I think it is enforcing permanence in a space where reality is inherently fluid. That is not malicious consumption. That is a systemic constraint.
A constraint that rips off faces?
The Codex tells us exactly why Rule 10 exists, because the framework of the tavern requires absolute consequences to generate the highest yield of energy. There is no plot armor. Every action carries a scar because consequence is the mechanism of extraction.
That just sounds like a predator with rules.
But here is where your predator theory truly hits a wall. If the tavern is this flawless, sentient, biological consumer that demands a piece of every soul, pre-molding them for digestion, how do you explain the myth of the untouched hero?
Come on, it's exactly that. A myth.
A myth heavily circulated among the most veteran paranoid survivors. Yes, the official codex claims no untouched heroes and no clean victories. But the persistent rumor of an adventurer who bypassed Rule 10 entirely, who descended into the depths and returned without a single permanent scar, is vital to understanding the tavern's true nature.
It's just a rumor?
If you are dealing with a starving, biological predator of that magnitude, escape without being bitten is mathematically impossible. A beast that large, with walls that breathe and floors that swallow you, does not miss its prey.
Unless it wants to.
But if the tavern is a rigid, rule-based machine running on code, permissions, and cosmic laws, then there must be a mechanical exploit, a loophole in the programming.
You can't hack a living building.
If someone managed to sequence their actions perfectly, balancing their karma to absolute zero, and utilizing the exact right dimensional keys at the exact right millisecond, they could theoretically traverse the battery without triggering the extraction protocols. The mere existence of that myth implies a system that can be hacked. You cannot outrun a multidimensional predator, but you can hack a server.
See, that relies on the assumption that the myth is an organic rumor spread by survivors. I see the untouched hero myth as the ultimate psychological weapon deployed by the tavern itself.
You think the tavern invented the rumor?
Absolutely. If I am a sentient predator that feeds on hope, ambition, and eventual failure, what better way to ensure my prey keeps voluntarily climbing into the infinite floors than by planting the rumor that someone actually made it out?
That is incredibly paranoid.
It is a lure. It injects a false sense of control into a fundamentally uncontrollable environment. The tavern wants you to think you can hack it, because as long as you are trying to sequence your actions and outsmart the architecture, you aren't trying to leave.
Well,
You're just walking deeper and deeper into the digestive tract, entirely of your own free will. Even when the Void Syndicate tried to force a unified entry through a locked dimensional gate, the tavern locked them in an administrative pause, demanding an equivalent sacrifice. It didn't want their code to align. It demanded suffering as the key.
But equivalent sacrifice is literally a mathematical term. It is an entry condition. It is an equation balancing itself on a cosmic scale. You input a variable like giving up an ally or permanently sacrificing a limb, and the output is the gate opening.
A very cruel output.
A predator just eats you. A machine makes a transaction based on programmed limits. And remember the Void Caller? It stood before a similarly locked gate, and its internal monologue was recorded. It asked, it reacts, it knows I am a parasite. Or is it just an elaborate design?
Yeah, even the cosmic beings don't know for sure.
Exactly. Even the entities actively invading the tavern cannot tell if they are dealing with a localized mind or perfectly designed antivirus software.
And perhaps that ambiguity is the core of the horror here. As we try to wrap our heads around these heavily redacted layers of the codex, the paranoia just deepens. Because if the predator theory holds, we are looking at an entity that has completely outgrown the gods that supposedly built it.
Which is terrifying in its own right.
We are dealing with a living mansion that views entire realities, infinite timelines, and even the deities themselves as nothing more than meals waiting on a cosmic plate.
And if the machine theory holds, the existential dread is arguably much worse. It means that all the suffering, all the flayed skulls and melted hands and shattered minds aren't even personal.
Yeah, it's just business.
It means that everything, the heroes, the villains, BAAL fueling the chaos, the Keeper maintaining the order, they are all just functional, replaceable components of a cold, indifferent battery. Your pain doesn't matter to the tavern. Your heroism doesn't matter. It just matters that your struggle generates enough friction to keep the lights on in the multiverse.
Whether the tavern is a starving beast dragging you into its maw, or a grinding machine processing your soul into code, the end result for the adventurer walking through those heavy oak doors is exactly the same: absolute, irreversible transformation. You don't ever truly leave the tavern, you just become a part of its architecture.
And honestly, the Codex heavily hints that there are even deeper, darker secrets regarding the true nature of BAAL and the Keeper hidden in the lowest, unmapped floors. If the tavern is a closed-loop system, perhaps the architects themselves are trapped inside the machine they built, being harvested just like the adventurers.
It really makes you rethink that classic moment of stepping into an ancient ruin, when you touch the cold stone wall and you feel a faint, rhythmic vibration. You have to wonder, is that the hum of a cosmic engine keeping reality from collapsing? Or is it a heartbeat waiting for you to take one more step inside?
We will leave it to you to decide what truly lies at the bottom of the infinite floors.